So you got yourself a Switch for the holidays under the guise of getting your kids a Switch for the holidays. Come on, we all know why you got it. And you want to relive ye olden days of playing Final Fantasy games, but don't know which ones are available to you. Don't worry, I've got you totally covered. Please note, this list will be obsolete fairly quickly, but that's just the gaming industry as a whole. Just like your kids forgetting about the Switch that you bought for them. Firstly, at the time of filming, the pixel remasters are not available on Switch yet. And that's a real shame because it would be perfect. But at any rate, click this card to see why I really thought they were going to be on Switch soon. This ultimately means that the first 6 Final Fantasy games aren't available on Switch, so we're just going to start with Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. These 3 PS1 classic Final Fantasy titles are absolutely available for Switch. And for a decent price also. Kind of. There's been some really cool upgrades to them as well, including graphics that have been cleaned up quite considerably. But the really cool things that were added to them were things like completely cutting random battle encounters if you wish, 3 times speed increase for when you're drawing magic spells in Final Fantasy VIII, or just grinding in general. Various growth buffs and battle enhancements like instant limit breaks have also been added. The only weird thing about them is the original backgrounds haven't really been upgraded too much, so it looks just a little fuzzy, not unlike this hat and whatever this thing is called. I don't know, this is apparently called a pom-pom, which isn't that what the Moogles have on them? Anyway, there are digital and physical versions of each of these games too. Well, at least there are physical boxes for them. I'm really not sure if they actually have a game card in them, as I didn't even know a physical version of these games existed when I picked them up. You'll see a trend of this pretty soon. Final Fantasy X and X-2 are available also on Switch, and just as with 7 through 9, there have been some upgrades added to them. According to the Nintendo website, fully immerse yourself in the world of Spira as you enjoy over 100 combined hours of gameplay across the 2 classic titles. Features include enhanced heroes, villains, monsters, environments, and cutscenes, and something also about an HD facelift, I don't know. One of my favorite upgrades is a completely redone soundtrack, and you can switch between the original OST and the newly redone music. I'll get into the music in just a bit whenever I cover another title in the future, but just know that the music is completely redone in a really cool way. Oh, and also the installation size of these 2 games is just under 27 gigs, but this one says 14. I don't know. World of Final Fantasy Maxima. Now, the Switch version of this particular game doesn't offer anything different than the other Maxima versions, so I'll just point out some of the differences between Maxima and not Centra. I'm sorry, that's a dumb card joke. And there are a lot of little changes that improve the overall quality of life, including a treasure tracker is obtained after completing the game, making it a lot easier to find chests. New Game Plus is added also after completing the game. The Sandstalker minigame's difficulty has been lowered. A dungeon that is based around the original Final Fantasy is added, and that also includes battles with the 4 Fiends and Garland. An additional difficulty mode is added, and so many more things. It's interesting to note that Maxima actually began as DLC for World of Final Fantasy, but it got a physical release in North America, Southeast Asia, as well as Hong Kong and Korea. Final Fantasy Adventure is a really old game, originally made for the Game Boy way back in 1991. And if you look, I actually found my original copy of it in this book that's supposed to be meant for sports cards. And if you love Zelda and Secret of Mana, well, this game is actually in the Mana series despite it having a Final Fantasy name, so you'll probably love it if you haven't played it already. It's a long story, but you can pick this game up along with said Secret of Mana and Trials of Mana with the Mana Collection in both digital and physical forms. I actually didn't know about a physical version of these games until I walked into a game store about an hour after I bought them. Needless to say, I was pretty disappointed in myself. You remember earlier whenever I said there would be a trend that you'll notice? That was it. An older game for sure, but it's worth it, especially for the simple fact that you get 2 other great games smashed into the collection also. Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition. I mean, what is this even? Is it like a bite-sized version of Final Fantasy 15? Kotaku says it's meant for players without the time, patience, or attention span for the full game. Can we get one of those for Final Fantasy 8? I mean, I guess it's got pretty fair reviews, but I don't know. I suppose I need to play it before I make any sort of assumptions. Final Fantasy XII of Zodiac Age was originally a PlayStation 2 game released in the mid-2000s, but now you can get it on Switch, and I have to say, this version's quality of life improvements made the game much more enjoyable than it already was. So this is based off of the International Zodiac Job System version, and it features some subtle and not so subtle changes, including remastered graphics with high-res lighting effects, an autosave feature, up to 7.1 surround sound, new fonts, new character models, and movie scenes have all been upgraded. And there's a high-speed mode. I mean, this thing is just action-packed with upgrades. If you've never given Final Fantasy XII a shot before, now's a really solid time to sink some time into it to see if it's a game that's meant for you or not. And here's the thing I mentioned about music earlier. The soundtrack for this game has been completely re-recorded. I think that's neat, but I'm not sure why it was necessary. Just like with Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, max license points and guild functionalities are also granted to the player, as well as a New Game Plus and New Game Minus. Ooh. For the record, if you do plan on picking any of these up, or any other Final Fantasy games up via Amazon, if you use my link in the description, which doesn't cost anything, you'll ultimately tell Amazon that I sent you, and you'll directly support the Returner's Hideout through making purchases you would normally make anyway. And thank you so much if you do indeed do that. There's no pressure. On to the next one. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition is a massive upgrade compared to the original release on GameCube nearly 2 decades ago. Wow. You know, it doesn't seem like that long, but okay, time. So the main takeaway from this game essentially is the fact that it's largely non-linear, meaning with the exception of a few quests the player must go through in order, it's really up to you to decide where you go and what you do. On the original GameCube release, it was possible to link up with a few other people with Game Boy Advances and play the game at the same time, which at the time was really neat and seemed a bit ahead of its time. When in a dungeon, the screen for player 1 showed a mini-map, player 2 had monster locations, player 3 had treasure locations, and player 4 showed enemy health and weaknesses, so communication was an absolute must whenever you linked up. However, with the remastered edition, all of those things are now part of the standard screens, and you can opt to turn all of it off too if you'd like. Although enemy information does seem to be non-existent, save for health bars for the bosses in the game. The audio's been upgraded, there are new voices, new dungeons and bosses. It's worth the price if you want to play this odd little spin-off. So there's also the Saga collection for Switch, which if you look at the game titles, they seemingly have nothing to do with Saga, as they're all Final Fantasy titles. Similarly to the Mana collection, this series started off as the Saga series in Japan before marketing it here in the States using the Final Fantasy moniker to essentially sell this new series. All 3 of these games are old Game Boy games that have been slightly modified to match the current time period, but they still keep the main ideas of the games intact. I have all these original games too, but it's much easier to pick up my Switch and play them. There's even an option to have the screen flipped on its side and your Switch is now just a really big Game Boy, and I actually love that. Just like with the Mana series, these older games are still worth revisiting, even if they are just a bit dated. I still love them just the same, even if just for the soundtracks. Lastly, Crisis Core Reunion. Now, at the time of writing this video, the actual release of the game still hasn't hit yet. Yes, I make these videos way far in advance, but since the source material has been out for a long time now, it's safe to assume that the core values of the game are untouched. When I played this for PSP way back, I actually fell in love with the game fairly quickly, and with the price of $49.99, use that link in the description I talked about earlier. It'll be well worth the price point, as the game is just fantastic. Since Square is releasing the Final Fantasy VII Remake in slow increments like they are, it would actually make a ton of sense if you play a bit of the remake and then a bit of Crisis Core to really see the story unfold in different ways as you make your way through them. So I want to take some time and thank you for the nice comments about this video that you're about to make, and also to thank you for subscribing. But I want to say one more thing about the Pixel remasters being on Switch. If you're really missing the first 6 Final Fantasies though, and you aren't sure if you should pick up the Pixel remasters or not, you don't want to miss this video where I go through the pros and cons of buying them.